Welcome to Future Histories. My name is Jan Groß, and it is my great pleasure to welcome Elisa Loncon Antileo in today's episode. She's a linguist and professor in the Department of Education at the University of Santiago de Chile, and she has been the first president of the Constitutional Convention in Chile. Just like the very recent episode with Matt Huber, I also recorded today's episode at the Great Transition Conference, where I was invited to take part in a symposium on democratic planning. Many thanks to everybody involved. It has been a great pleasure to be able to meet so many interesting people there. I really enjoyed it. A little pointer to my German-speaking audience. I think today's episode connects really nicely to the second episode I recorded with Daniel Leuk. That would be episode 39 of Season 2 of Future Histories, titled Daniel Leuk zu Freiheit, Souveränität und Recht ohne Gewalt. And then a little pointer to my English-speaking audience as well. You do have the possibility to subscribe to the English episodes only. There's an RSS feed for Future Histories International. And there's a homepage as well, futurehistories-international.com. So go ahead and subscribe. That would be great. And while you're at it, if you like Future Histories, please tell your friends about it. Maybe they will like it as well. But now, please enjoy today's episode with Elisa Loncon Antileo. Welcome, Elisa.
Hi, Mari Pulamien. Peumangele kame feleimon kompuche, kom litunche. Hello to everybody. I greeting you in my mother tongue. That is very important for me and for my people that you hear my voice in my mother tongue, because we are a original nation here in Chile and our language is losing today. So it's our role to recover it. Thank you to invite me to attend this meeting.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you for being here. For those who don't know anything about the constitutional process that has been started in Chile in 2020, could you give us an overview of the process that was set up for the collective development of the new Chilean constitution? What was special about it?
Yeah, I want to tell you that it was a very important process for all of the Chilean people. It didn't start at 2020 because it's born from the social movement long time ago. I want to mention 2006 with a student from high school. They initiate a very big demands for public education at that time. So the student from university, they was also in the mobilization and call all of the social Chilean movement. So we had a very hard social situation in 2019. Millions of people took the streets at that time, demanding social rights for the people. So the government and the parliament called for a special meeting in order to establish an accord, a political accord, to have a referendum to change the Pinochet constitution. So they did it, and then in 2021, we created the first Constituent Assembly. In that included 155 conventional, and that include also the party, also the indigenous nations, and all the social movements and political parties. So we started to write the new constitution, and in 1 year we got it. And then we have a new referendum in order to approve or refuse the proposal. That proposal included the right for nature, right for indigenous people, parity in the women, equality between women and men, social rights, and all of the for all of the Aboriginal nation too. So, but we had a big difficult situation because the citizenship rejected the new proposal. It was rejected in September 4th last year. But the main topic why it was rejected was the fake news, hate discourses, the people who are in the rejection position, they create a lot of misinformation about the constituent process, about the conventionals, and people fear to give the votes for that new constitution. Some of the fake news was they said that they will lose the house. There is no right to have a house. There is no right to have, for instance, social security. Or they said that the indigenous people want to change, want to divide Chile. And the indigenous people hate the Chilean people. So those were hate discourses, and people feared about that. So they rejected the constitution, the new proposal that we wrote at that time. So the government called for a meeting with the parliament, and they decide to improve the process and call for the second constitutional process. We are today in the second constitutional process, but they modify the representation of the people, because they include a no democratic way to elect the conventionals, and they decide half of all of the team that will write the constitution. They must be designated by political parties. There wasn't a democratic process. So they decide to include people from political parties, exclude the indigenous people. And then we had a new referendum to vote for the half 51 conventional again. We had it just 2 weeks ago, but there was not a special seat for indigenous. The indigenous people elected one Mapuche person to represent the indigenous interests inside this second process. But the designated conventional, they are today as assessor political, is a political teams expert in constitution. They draw the proposal, and inside that proposal there was not people. There were no there weren't indigenous people inside the design. So in that second frame, there is no participation of indigenous people. Today, the elected people from the council, they will review that proposal, this second proposal, but we don't. We are not agree with the misrepresentation of the indigenous people, and we will have a next, at the end of this year, we will have the new referendum in order to decide if we approve or we reject the new proposal. Today, we don't know how that proposal will include indigenous rights or mother nature rights or women's rights. Those are the more difficult topic for the conservative parties. Today, the voice is for the conservative parties.
Were there special obstacles within the process for the Chilean constitution? Because if I remember correctly, I think in Bolivia, for example, they had a constitutional process and it was different than the one in Chile. And if I remember correctly, then I think in some talk that you gave, I think you stated that the way that it was set up, that there was a referendum after the process with this certain percentage that would have to be reached, that this was a special obstacle within the process for the Chilean constitution. Is that right? Am I remembering this correctly, or was it a very regular process the way it was set up in Chile?
No, there is not a regular process in Chile. The constitutional discussion is democratic. Constitutional discussion is a new process today in Chile because the last constitution was written by the dictatorship regime without social participation. So this is the last process that we did, and from 2021, it was a really new process because included all of the social movement. It was for the first time in the history of Chilean society that half part of the conventional were women, for instance. There is no constitution written by women in here and outside of Chile. So that was a very, very important, and that was the difference between the Bolivian process, the Bolivian constitutional process, or Ecuador constitutional process, because here the participation of women was really were in equal relationship between women and men in that first process. But today things are very different because this expert commission elected by political party, they avoid all of the topic that we included in the first process. So today is really different from the first process. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And one thing that is also very important is in the first process, we include the plurinationality. The plurinationality is a political proposal that born in the Bolivian process, also from Ecuador process. The indigenous people there, they speak about the plurinationality, and we are also Chile is have a diversity of nation here, so we included like plurinationality as the political way to resolve the conflict between the state and indigenous people, to overcome genocide, racism, damage coexistence, so also to recover all of the collective rights, because there is no political solution from the state to resolve ancestral or historical problem that did the creation of the states with Aboriginal nation. Aboriginal nation didn't participate in the creation of the states. So for the first time we included, and we said, okay, we are different. There are diversity of nation here, so all together will define the framework, the constitution for all of the Chilean people. So that was really strong and very important. But in this second process, they avoid the plurinationality because they said that the people rejected. But I told you the people rejected because of hate discourse. It was not true that we hope to divide Chile. We need a relationship, equal relationship with Chilean society. That's all.
And when it comes to plurinationality, how does that work if there are like conflicting rights? Since if there are different nations within the nation, so to speak, and these different nations have different ideas of, for example, how the question of rights should be approached, is there a way how to address it when there are different opinions that clash with each other? Because I imagine it wouldn't be a good idea to simply overrule one over the other, but there needs to be a process of getting to an understanding of the different forms of how rights are being conceptualized within the nations in the nation. I'm not sure if this was a question that can be understood.
Yeah, yes, I understand your question because people fear about the plurinationality when they think that the indigenous will use the rights of the non-indigenous people. And the question they did is indigenous, does the indigenous will have more rights than not non-indigenous people, you know? But there is no problem inside if you understand a lot of problem that we had along the history with the indigenous. The plurinationality first support that Chilean society must recognize the pre-existence of the indigenous because we were first here in that territory. Then came the state. The second point is different to think about nations and states. A state, it's an organization of nation. But what happened with internal colonialism inside the Chilean state? They organized the state just with a white point of view without the point of view of indigenous people. So we have a long violation of human rights inside of our country. We have genocide, the colonial project settled here in Chile and in America. It was a genocide project and that killed a nation, Aboriginal nation. Not only killed physically, they killed our culture, our language, and deprive us of about our human rights. We were not included as human inside the creation of the state from the beginning. They said that we were like people from pre-logic, primitive, without conscience, we a lot of work in order to avoid our rights. So your question is we are in the 21st century and we are still alive today. I am a teacher in the university. I work every day with a Chilean student, or my neighbor are Chileans. So we need equal relationship between them. States, governments, after the dictatorship regime, they recognized it, that there was problem, historical problem, injustice problem inside of our state with indigenous people. They create law, they create special commission in order to resolve that problems. They vote in favor of the United Nations Declaration for Indigenous People, for instance, or ILO Convention. Our governments here give the votes in order to accept that ILO Convention that speak about political right of indigenous people. So, but what happened here in the country? They erase the rights that they recognize internationally. So, what we need those rights to be practices is inside the country, inside the society, and we need to live our rights. I'm speaking about collective rights because there are individual rights and also collective rights. Our rights are collective rights. For instance, language is a collective right because I can speak my language. If I find somebody that speaks my language, I need the collective. Community is a collective right. We, the indigenous, we live in community. We live with our family. We have a big family because it's connected with the community. That is our collective right. Autonomy and self-determination. It's also collective rights. All of them were recognized by our governments. So what we need today, we need to include it inside the law in order to live our right, in order to be recognized as people, as human, you know? So that's the topic that the Chilean people need to understand. Those rights is not against the Chilean, because we had our territory, but our territory was occupied. But we need our territory in order to live, and government and state have international instruments in order to solve that problem. We need them, we need to implement it. And we are here talking about that topic in order to help to implement it, those rights, collective rights inside our territory in democratic way. This is the plurinationality. To resolve historical problems that have the state with the indigenous people in a territory using the democratic way of solution.
Very interesting. One of the questions that I was asking myself when preparing is that on a certain level, there seems to be a form of contradiction, because you propose to use this element of a constitution, of a constitutional convention in this case, of a constitution, which comes out of a certain political tradition, a tradition of political theory as well. And it is closely tied, for example, to a specific notion of subjects. And it's a Western notion of subjects, a subject of reason. You already pointed towards this. That is kind of underlying this notion of a constitution as well. And this is, of course, not unproblematic because, as you pointed out, indigenous people were for a long time excluded from this notion of subject. And I was wondering how these things can be brought together, because while there are certainly aspects within this notion of subject, that have served as a carrier, so to speak, for also emancipatory projects. For example, broadly speaking, within a left humanist project throughout history, this notion of subject has, of course, also been used as a carrier for forms of domination and subjugation of other humans and also of nature. So this has been an instrument of exclusion and oppression as well. So my question would be, how can then a constitution, which is, as I said, an element of Western political philosophy, how can a constitution be thought of and enacted without having to rely on this specific notion of a, let's say, liberal subject?
Yeah. Yes. So for us, and I think that for all of the social movements along the world, we need to understand that we are still keeping historical problems. And the right wing, left wing, they promised to all of the society from all of the continent that they will resolve the problem that we have in the society. I'm speaking about Eurocentric philosophy. I'm speaking about capitalism and about Marxism. The idea of progress that it came to our continent is a political idea. It's not an economical project. It's an ideological project. And European people believed at that time that with that solution, the progress inside of our continent, they will solve the problem that we have here. But progress never come to our territory. Indigenous people, we are living without our rights. I told you our collective rights. Progress also doesn't solve the women's rights. Women were sacrificed by the progress ideology. Indigenous was sacrificed by the progress ideology. Nature was sacrificed by progress philosophy because they need to exploit it in order to give social security for the people. And that is not true because we are living without social security. Indigenous people, there is no recognition of the right of women, for instance. Women was considered like a inferior human from men, and men decide for women from the beginning. I'm speaking about 1492 when the Spaniard came to our continent. They did it in order to have a modernity in our continent, but they sacrifice for the progress, sacrifice the people for the progress, and Marxist ideology didn't say we have a violation of human rights with that ideology. They support the progress. They support the progress because they said bourgeois are making progress. We need that progress in order to resolve to have in the future unclass society. But we need the progress. They don't discuss the deep philosophy that was inside the progress against indigenous, against nature, against women. So today we have those problems in everywhere. So what we need today, we need to rethink about what we did in the past, what the European culture did or philosophy European philosophy did for all of the continent, because the progress born from Europe, it doesn't born from Africa, it doesn't born from Latin America. It was born in Europe. And they use the ideology for all of the world. Today, the problem is in everywhere, in all the continent. There is no solution for those, our rights. So what we need today, we are in the 21st century. We need to talk together. We need to include diversity way of thinking, because the colonial, European, Eurocentric way of thinking doesn't give the solution to our problems. And we support that there are philosophy, there are political models or communitarian systems in our territory, inside of our society. So we need to recover it in order to find together a plural solution and include the plurality inside the democracy, because the democracy is defined by white people, and is defined by the idea of progress, and democracy is still making sacrifice of our people and also of in everywhere. So we need to modify our conception of state, our conception of constitution, and the way how to modify it is including the diversity, including different philosophy, including all of our rights as human, individual and collective rights, and also women's rights, but also nature rights. Because we have other philosophy. Indigenous people, we believe that nature is alive. For instance, Earth is alive, and we need to be in relationship with nature. And that's way of thinking is not include the right wing, neither in left wing. So we need to talk. We need to share other way of thinking.
What would you say would be a good route to implement this different form of, I would say, relationality towards nature for, in this case, in my case, for example, for someone like me, coming from a Western background, because I think that it's not a possibility to simply adopt Mapuche philosophy, for example, because this is like a very different way, not only of thinking, but also a philosophy that is enacted in a certain practice, as you already stated, rightly so. And so for someone like me, for example, or for a constitutional convention in other countries, let's say we would try to argue for a new constitution in Germany, where I come from, and we would want to have a different form of relationality towards nature to be a part of this new constitutional process and the constitution that will be brought about through this process. We want a different form of relationality to nature to be inscribed into this constitution as well. What would you say can be a framework that can be used for people that do not come from a practice and from a also philosophical background that already has this different form of relationality within it? How can we include it in processes that used to argue from a perspective of Western philosophy, but will now have to kind of develop into other forms of relation towards nature as well. Do you have an idea of how to approach this task? Because it's a task that is not only important for Chile, of course, it's important for the whole world, because we can see how this very extractive logic, this logic of domination over nature, how this is actually destroying the basis of our existence, and we need to find different ways to relate it on a very foundational level. But it doesn't seem to happen somehow. Instead, people are arguing for kind of quick fixes without trying to really reflect upon this deeper relation. And I'm wondering if you have an idea of how to approach it in different contexts.
Yes. It's a very important question because we need to understand ourselves from different point of view, and there are some theory that supports the diversity and plurality inside democracy, but also there are a lot of practice that recognize ourselves connected, because we are not isolated inside the society. We need to have a critical point of view about development, I told you, but we also need to decolonize our mind, our practice, and we need to include a new epistemology of the humankind way of thinking, because Eurocentric or European philosophy, instead of resolve the European philosophy connected with capitalism, connected with Marxism, I'm thinking about that kind of philosophy. It doesn't solve the problem. And we, as indigenous everywhere, in every country, we have been in our territory using our own solution. We still keep our communitarian way of life. We are fighting to protect our language, because inside of our language there is a philosophy inside. There are a lot of knowledge that we need. So this is part of our struggle. But inside the big discussion, the global discussion, we need to problematize the individualism that born from the capitalist way of thinking. Today, the neoliberal system destroyed the connection of the people, of human with the community. And we are member of a community. We need to support the community inside of our life. And also the topic about connecting with Mother Nature. We used to learn that for instance, that the river is far from our house, and we used to think about the water outside of us, the river outside of us, wind outside of us. But what it is inside of our body? 75% of our body is water. So the river is inside of us. What was the philosophy that support that the natural resource are outside of the people? It was the capitalism system. It was the European philosophy that just accept the rationality of man, not women, So it's no difficult to include different practice today, because we need that different practice inside of our family, inside of our life, inside of our community, and inside of our country. On the contrary, we are not looking for the life of ourselves, the life of my family, the life of the environment, because the pollution is contaminated our life. So our environment, and there is no possibility to have life in our place, in our space. We need to protect life, all kind of life, our life, insect life, animal life, because we need the biological diversity. We need it for the future of our humanity. And all of the country, all of the culture in the world, we have the same problem, environmental problem. For instance, women problems, persecution of indigenous leader. All of the country have it. The discrimination, racial discrimination. So the problem that the indigenous people have today in our community, those problems you can also find it in your European or in Europe or in America and everywhere. So, but we need we need to pluralize our philosophy, our epistemology, and decolonize our mind, because colonization put the one kind of way of thinking inside, like a rule for all of the world, and that is not true.
And within this process, what role does a constitution play, or what role can it play in an ideal case? Because you have this plurality, but you also, and that's like one possible role a constitution can play, you have the plurality within a larger framework that is being defined through, in this case, the Constitution. So there is also a form of, let's say, unity as well, created through the Constitution itself as a certain type of framework. So what would you say? What's this relationship between the difference and the sameness? And also what can the role of the Constitution be in an ideal case?
Yeah.
What can it do for the people?
Yeah, there are different level of solution. There are a communitarian solution. There are, for instance, participation of the social movement or the decision of women inside the social movement is one part of the solution. And the state is an instrument, is a structure of power, But if that structure of power doesn't recognize the rights of community, the right of women, the right of indigenous, the right of the nature, that structure is a colonial structure. And by the origin, it was a colonial. The state was a colonial structure, but it's an instrument that all of the country had today. We can be autonomy. For instance, indigenous people, we claim for our autonomy and self-determination in order to take our own decision. But the state is there, and the state is taking decision in using without us today. So we need to be part of that, to be part of that decision inside the state, but using our way of thinking, that will be an interchange between culture, I think. On the contrary, all of the decisions that state take come from just from the white and the progress philosophy or colonial philosophy. We need to contribute it. That is at the top level as the society was the design of society. The West way of society is very hierarchical way of thinking. That's hierarchy. The state is in the top. But if the state respects our autonomy and self-determination, we can keep our communitarian way of life, but the state need to recognize it. On the contrary, the law persecuted us. That happened in our history. We were persecuted by the law of the state. When we create our flag, we have a very beautiful Mapuche flag. We created in 1992, and the state persecuted us because we take the decision to have our own flag. What happened? And that was because the state didn't recognize that the indigenous people have the decision to have their own flag. Because the Chilean state didn't recognize that we are a nation. We are not a state, we are a nation. And one state can have a different nation inside. Mm-hmm. This is we apply for that solution, mm-hmm. to one state with different nation. And they are experienced in Europe. They are experienced in America. The state have different nation inside and recognize the right of those nations. So we have plural state. We are multilingualism inside the state. We also have juridical pluralism inside the state in North America, for instance. Because there are people that are looking for that solution. And we can all go to find a solution. We just need to know what is going on in different parts of the world and to be responsible. All of us, we need to be responsible about nature. All of us need to be responsible with cultural diversity, with multilingualism. We need it, you know? So we need to talk about decolonize our way of thinking and the plurinationality, the pluralism, right for nature, women's rights. All of those topics belong to decolonize, help us to decolonize our way of thinking, mm-hmm. in order to have a new society to have equal rights inside the difference.
Great. While you were talking, I was already reflecting that the word that I used, on the one side having plurality and on the other unity, that actually the word unity is the wrong one, I would say, because I encounter these kinds of discourses also, for example, in the field of, there's a form of anarchist constitutionalism, and they have to deal with similar topics, also with questions of plural forms of jurisdictions within a larger, like, organizational form, so to speak. And I have to correct myself insofar as it is not really about then creating a meta unity. That's not the goal. It's just it's to find a framework that works with the plurality within it. And can allow this different forms of approaches without, like, bursting while doing so. So, but I just wanted to note that I have to correct myself in terms of this word of unity, because that's actually not the goal. It can be it can have these parallel approaches without trying to approach a higher level unity, so to speak. So, I just wanted to.
Yeah, one one thing, one important thing of to understand what I'm talking about is because I speak about the diversity, about plurality, and our struggle is to have a society, a plural society, plural way of life, different languages, different cultures, because inside the plurality, inside the diversity, there are the richness of our humanity, you know? So to force unity in one way, as the European did, with unity connected with the progress, that means the genocide for indigenous people. You know, misrespect of other way of thinking. It's a very authoritarian way to think about the unity in one line, historical line, and that project develop European people in one historical line, because they consider us, all of the Latin America, misdeveloped country that in the future will have the development, you know? Also, international institution speak about us like underdeveloped country. They suppose that all of the policy that they did will help us for the development. And what is the development? The progress. But there was just one line of way of thinking. We were primitive, then we were the Marxism said that we were primitive communism, you know, feudal society, then capitalism, then the socialists, then we'll have a common society without class. But in one line, in one progressive line, in just one way of thinking, you know, and they implanted in everywhere. Capitalism did the same. And neoliberal state today are doing the same. So this is why is a part of our struggle to inside the state, to pluralize the state. But it's not all of our struggle, because we need our communitarian way. We need to keep our language. We need to recover our philosophy. We need to use our traditional dress. We need to recover traditional knowledge about how to cook food, for instance. What society today is wasting a lot of food, and poor country, there are children that they don't have food. The same happened with clothes. In Chile, we have a very beautiful desert at the north part of Chile, and the company used our desert, for old clothes that's a pollution for our desert. So this is why we need to pluralize our way of thinking, because just one way to consider the society and the history destroyed our humanity.
Yeah, and I think I'll have to add that why I initially used the word unity, which is which was the wrong choice, but what I wanted to initially actually point at is that that's why I find this notion of a constitution so interesting, and that you were the president of this process, actually, because the very notion of a constitution can be such a tool to organize this plurality. So that's at least from the contexts that I come from. For example, I did interviews with Daniel Loik, who's a person who works very much in the tradition of anarchism, and also looks closely at topics of how juridism, I would say, maybe in English, how this can be thought in very different ways without the coercive state, without the violence of the state and stuff like that. And there are ways to approach these questions of, let's say, societal-wide organization and regulation of plurality in this case. There are ways to address this, and one way or an important tool might be the tool of constitution. And that's why I think it's such a important and interesting combination that you are so heavily involved in these both fields, like the insistence on plurality and the struggle for a different form of constitution, because these two things fit together quite interestingly, I think, and not only in terms of a defense against the state, because you can also think constitutionalism without state at all. And that's like the next evolvement.
Yeah, Aboriginal people, we had our own constitution, and it is oral. By we learned about it by oral tradition, because one constitution is a framework that organizes one society, and all of the society, including indigenous, we have our rules to organize our society and to understand life, rights, our rights, and non-human rights. So, but the modern society that is along the world have the state, and it's a reality. The state is one reality. We need to change 5 centuries of colonialism. And we had the state today making change inside of our children, for instance, by school. Our children receive the white history, not our history. White language, not our language. Who did that? And who is state doing that? The state law. This is why we need to change and modify the inside, but it's not the last of our history, because we need to recover our spirituality. We need to recover our motherhood. We don't know the future today, but we are suffering because what the monocultural, monolingual state and colonial state is doing with our people. maybe it's a transitory solution. Because if you put the diversity inside the law, that will change the school. If you put the language inside the law, we will have the right to listen to the news on television in our language, for instance. And that will modify. When I was the first president of the constitutional process here in Chile, I speak in mother tongue. And there are a lot of people that never listened to Aboriginal language. For the first time, they listened by the media, by TV. And that make an impact, a social impact. And we need those impact to see we are here, we are alive, because a monocultural, a monolingual state is denying us. And maybe you have a very strong anarchist movement inside or indigenous movement, but we just see ourselves in the movement. But what happened with all of the society that are thinking that we are barbaro, that we are not, we are, for instance, here in Chile, they said that we are violent people, terrorists. So we need to make, to have the possibility to share with us all of the society, because we are not isolated. And we need to change the majority of the mentality. And we are here, we are the 10% of the Chilean society. And when the first referendum about the Constitution, 38% give the votes for the plurinationality. But what happened with the other? We need to make changes inside the mentality of the majority of the people. And how can we do it that? We need the institution, because the system, political system, use the institution in order to modify the conscience of the people. Today, they are not killing directly as the conqueror did long time ago. But they are killing us using the institution, church, using media, school, military forces, cinema, using all of those institutions to support one way of thinking. So we needed to make the plurality inside all of those institutions.
Elisa, there's a last question that I ask all of my guests, and this question is, if you think about the future, what makes you joyful?
Yeah, it's the future must be diverse. The future, I really appreciate the plurilingualism inside person. We need to be plurilingual person. One language is not enough. So that is very important for the education today. We need to recover the right for nature. Free lakes, for instance, free river, without pollution, without intervention. So also the women's rights, because we are able to take our own decision. Why the man have to take the decision for us? Is the same question in indigenous matters, because why white people have to take the decision for us? We are not children, we are nations, So the future must be better without racism, without colonialism, and will be better respecting Mother Earth as our mothers. In my culture, we pray for the nature. We say thanks to the nature. And I believe that if more people do and feel that the mother nation will recognize us, all of us, as their children, no? Or their son. So with different values, society with different values that keep the life for us and for the diversity, cultural diversity, biological diversity, and also with a women decision inside the world. Because we have war today, and women, we always we take care. We know how to take care of other people. And when one president, one country does the war, they don't think about children, they don't think about elders, they don't think about the other. Maybe a woman can think about other, but with other values. No, I'm not thinking in Margaret Thatcher. Because he had a patriarchal way of thinking. We need to stop the patriarchalism too.
Thank you so much for being part of Future Histories.
Thank you for the interview. Have a good time.
That was our show for today. Thanks a lot for listening. If you want to support Future Histories, you can do so on Patreon. For this, visit patreon.com/futurehistories, or you can simply tell a friend that you liked the show and that he, she, or they might like it as well. Thanks a lot, and hear you in 2 weeks.